Hello and welcome to episode 5 of What's Tom Reading. I'm Tom, and this week I'm talking about The Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the show. All right, so this week we are talking about The Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis, and you may know the author, C.S. Lewis, from the Chronicles of Narnia books that were turned into those movies where the annoying little brother's lust for gross candy compels him to become essentially the main bad guy of the entire franchise. Of course, who among us has never considered selling a loved one for some Turkish delight? Maybe I should go easier on Edmund. But anyway, this book has nothing to do with the Chronicles of Narnia. C.S. Lewis wrote the Screwtape Letters in 1942 during the height of World War II. And for those who don't know, Lewis is, or was rather, he's dead now, obviously, but he was an Englishman. And he was actually pretty good buds with J.R.R. Tolkien, the author of the Lord of the Rings books that were turned into a movie where Frodo, the ring bearer, completely turns on his lifelong best friend and faithful companion, Sam, because he thinks Sam might have eaten some bread. The wise Frodo instead opts to put his trust in the just visibly evil Gollum, who is actively trying to kill him just all of the time to steal the ring. And the ever faithful Sam apparently is unsure about whether he did actually eat all of the bread. So he just kind of dips. He just kind of leaves and ends up slipping down an enormous cliff. And then he finds that same bread that Gollum supposedly threw there. And it's like, hey, wait a second. I didn't eat all of the bread on accident. So then he decides to turn around and address the issue, ultimately resulting in him bodily carrying the exceedingly lame Frodo over the finish line to save the world while Frodo gets all of the credit. Now that's a life lesson, folks. Sometimes you're Sam, loyal, good, hardworking, honest, a little on the chubby side maybe, but, heart of gold. Sometimes you're Frodo, weak, scrawny, selfish, and an active liability to everyone you've ever known. Heck, sometimes you're even Gollum, stinky, toothless, and oozing with mustache-twirling evil. We've all been all of these at different times throughout our lives, no doubt. Where possible, try to stay more on the Sam side of the line and leave the Frodo and Gollum stuff at the door. The only possible exception is that it's sometimes all right to wear a loincloth, so long as it is tastefully cut and clean. I'm actually wearing my podcasting loincloth right now. It's a little skimpier than my out on the town loincloths, but it's comfortable and it helps me think. Anyway, tangent there. What was I talking about? Oh, yeah, the Screwtape Letters. Sorry, guys. Don't know why I started talking about the Lord of the Rings. But I guess you can just expect that to happen periodically since I dream of the Lord of the Rings most nights and it's often on my mind. In fact, I'm almost certainly going to end up reviewing that book at some point down the line, but I just want to make sure that I have all of the kinks ironed out before I try to tackle one of my all-time favorites. I want to be able to do it maximum justice. So, I was saying that C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien were buds. That's right. So Lewis actually, he dedicated the Screwtape Letters to Tolkien, which is
sweet. How cool would that be, right? Like you're just a pair of, all-time greatest authors palling around and hanging out. How'd you like to be the third wheel in that conversation? In fact, if I had a time machine, I might just go back and just kind of lurk while they talked about whatever high-minded, interesting author things they talk about. But okay, so I'm talking about the Screwtape Letters, and you might not have heard, or you might not have read them, but you've almost certainly heard about them or heard some quote from them at some point in your life. It's a very, very quotable book, and it's really cool. The premise of it is sort of interesting. And it might help if I give you some background here. So it's during World War II and London, England, largely, a lot of the cities in England, where C.S. Lewis is living at the time and where Tolkien is living at the time. They're dealing with
something called the Blitz. And if you haven't heard of it, it's basically a period in time during World War II where the German Luftwaffe were flying over cities in England and just bombing them, just bombing the crap out of them all the time, bombing buildings, bombing schools, bombing hospitals, just bombing whatever they could bomb. They didn't really seem to be interested in, well, I mean, I think they initially pretended like they were going after like military targets. But after a little while, they were like, nah, we're just gonna sort of bomb all of the people to try and break their morale. And it didn't work because the British are plucky and oops. So the sound you just heard was my microphone falling out of the ghetto holder that I had it rigged to. Because I only bring you the highest production quality in this podcast. Yeah. So as I was saying, this book is written during the Blitz. It's this period during World War II where the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, is just carpet bombing London and other cities around the UK. And they're doing this to try and demoralize the British, to kind of destroy their infrastructure. Doesn't really have the effect that's intended. It just kind of hardens the resolve of the plucky Brits, who, as I mentioned, are plucky. And so that's kind of the background here. And that it comes up several times throughout the book that it's kind of a contemporary thing that's going on. But basically, the Screwtape Letters it's a book that's written kind of as a compilation. And C.S. Lewis at the beginning of the book kind of does this disclaimer where he says, well, I'm not going to tell you how these letters came to be in my possession, but they did. And these are only half of the correspondence. And so the style they are referred to as being they are, first of all, letters, satirical, but it's also epistolary. And what that means is that it is in the form of letters. And so they're letters from Screwtape, the title character. So the Screwtape Letters are letters written by Screwtape. And he is a demon high up in the demon hierarchy, this ministry of temptation or whatever you want to call it. And he's writing these letters. That's the premise. Anyways, he's writing these letters to his nephew, whose name is Wormwood, and these letters are kind of helping Wormwood, who's kind of a more junior demon, less experienced, deal with tempting an Englishman who is just referred to as the patient. And so basically these correspondences are just Screwtape's side of a conversation, and he references Wormwood's supposed letters as they're coming in, but you never really hear Wormwood's perspective. You just get Screwtape's side of things, and it basically shakes out as kind of like this one-way correspondence where Screwtape, he's giving advice to this young demon Wormwood on how to basically ruin this Englishman, the patient's life. And it's got this book has a lot of Christian themes. It's called basically a Christian apologist novel. And it deals with a lot of, I guess, what a lot of people would kind of consider to be religious content. I certainly thought of it as being very religious, but it also has a lot of practical application for people who aren't religious, because what it mostly does is show kind of through this correspondence between these two demons, the way that they are influencing this human, the patient, to do just really unkind, uncharitable things and to think uncharitably about his fellow man. It's a very, very interesting take on kind of the strategy supposedly behind the scenes of these demons who are trying to just kind of bring out the worst in this guy who is the patient. And so that's one of the things, I guess that's the premise of the book. So now you know, it's kind of, the background is World War II era England during the Blitz. And the subject of the book, of course, is Screwtape and his letters. He's writing these letters to his nephew, and the nephew's trying to tempt an Englishman who's just called the patient. And that's the background of the book. So what I liked about this book is that it's a clever way to do what C.S. Lewis is trying to do. Obviously, because he dedicated this book to Tolkien, I think he's trying to do a little bit of, missionary work, a little bit of conversion work to try to get Tolkien on side with the Christian arguments. And there's definitely a good amount of that in the book. But there's also a really good amount of just commentary on human nature and kind of our worst habits, and kind of a little bit of a glimpse into how just silly. The bad choices that we make can be. It's just silly that, you know, we can get to a place where we're doing unkind things to people. Oh, baby's crying. I will be right back. Okay, sorry about that, folks. So I am back. Baby is settled again. Duty calls, you know. You gotta. Baby cries and mom's not home right now, so gotta handle it. So as I was saying, this book, it's epistolary. It's kind of from the demon's perspective. They refer to God and the angels as the enemy, right? So this is, they are kind of in a funny way, they're like the protagonists of the story, and the angels and God are the antagonists, and the patient is kind of the thing that they're fighting over. And this patient just kind of is a guy who's trying to live his life. And so the things that I really loved about this book, first of all, C.S. Lewis is masterful. He's an excellent writer. That obviously goes without saying, almost goes without saying. You might not have heard much about him or read much of his stuff, but you're almost certainly familiar with the Chronicles of Narnia. It's a great story. It has really lasted the test of time. He goes down as one of the best authors ever, for sure. And he's funny. And wise. And so what I loved most about this book is just how quotable it is. And normally, as I've said before in previous episodes, I don't want to do too many just outright quotes from the work. But in this case, I'm going to make an exception, because kind of the main thing that is good about this book is just how quotable and how real and how close to home some of this stuff tends to hit. And so, and some of it's, you know, profound kind of deep metaphysical things. And some of it's just nice, snappy little witticisms. Like, for example, here's one. It says, suspicion often creates what it suspects. That's it. And what a cool thought, right? That, you know, by being suspicious, we can often bring into being the thing that we're suspicious of, because we start to act like it's true, and then we influence the actions of others and make, you know, kind of make our nightmares come true just through our behavior. Here's another one. He says, we laugh at honor and are shocked to find traitors in our midst. You know, stuff like that I just really, really like, you know, kind of the warning tones throughout the novel that are like, hey, you know, maybe even if you're not Christian, or you're not into, you know, Christian apologetics or whatever, I think there's a lot of just wisdom here, and a lot of knowledge, and a lot of just kind of ingrained old man C.S. Lewis, like pure knowledge and wisdom. And this guy, he was a university professor, and just, you know, smart guy. Very prolific and well-respected author. You know, and he says, okay, so here's another one. Courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at the testing point, which means at the point of highest reality, right? So, you know, he talks about honor, he talks about courage, he talks about just all of these virtues, and then he talks about the vices as well. And he talks about the patients and the humans as kind of a group of people who seem to be aware of the existence of these demons who are messing with them and causing them problems. But how these demons work really hard to stay just one step ahead of the humans anyways, right? So he says, it's funny how mortals always picture us as putting things into their minds. In reality, our best work is done by keeping things out. And I thought that was really cool, you know, because we do have this kind of picture of, you know, the kind of the pop culture picture of the demon on your shoulder, just whispering, you know, bad things into your ear and trying to tempt you or whatever. But C.S. Lewis's contention here is that the demons are actually trying to keep a lot of stuff out, you know, and let your mind ruminate on the crap that's already in there, and you know, keep anything from coming in to interfere with that. And that just, you know, as I said, even if you're not into the Christian tones of the book, surely you can acknowledge the wisdom in, you know, the fact that people tend to be closed-minded, and they tend to be closed off to things that contradict
contradict what they've already kind of adopted as their own thing, right? We go throughout our lives, and somewhere along the line, someone we respect says something to us, and we just kind of absorb that into ourselves, and we make it our own, and we stand by it, and we don't want to let it go, because, to let it go, not only is it uncomfortable to change your mind, but it also undermines your judgment, right? Like when you initially adopted it, that was a dumb thing to do. And so, because it was wrong. And so you end up undermining your own judgment there. And man, it's tough to read this as I'm going, because I'm like, oh man, do I do that? Am I closed-minded? And I have to admit that some of this stuff really hits close to home, right? And this is not a particular example from my life. I know that's mostly friends and family who are listening to this podcast. And so I don't want you to think that I'm talking about any one of you. But I listened to this and I thought, man, I have been in situations where I'm working closely with somebody and they just kind of start to bug me. And when I read this passage from this book, I was like, okay, this is hitting a little too close to home here. So let me quote this to you. So this is Screwtape writing, as I said, to his nephew, Wormwood. So he says, when two humans have lived together for many years, it usually happens that each has tones of voice and expressions of face which are almost unendurably irritating to the other. Work on that. Bring fully into the consciousness of your patient that particular lift of his mother's eyebrows, which he learned to dislike in the nursery, and let him think how much he dislikes it. Let him assume that she knows how annoying it is, and that she does it to annoy. If you know your job, he will not notice the immense improbability of that assumption. And, of course, never let him suspect that he has tones and looks which similarly annoy her. As he cannot see or hear himself, this is easily managed. I read that and I was like, dang it. I have been working with people, not recently, of course, not recently. So anyone who's listening to this, you're safe. But in my previous years, I have worked with people who I'm like, man, you're just kind of a pain in the butt. And the things that you do just bug me. And I have definitely been in the situation where I am not looking at myself and I'm not looking at the things that I might be doing that bug other people. I'm not looking in the mirror, so to speak. And so that hit really close to home. Other things I liked about this book, just kind of a satirical tone. I like the wit. I like the humor. I like satire. He kind of roasts his contemporaries a little bit. I really, really dig that. I like books that kind of are, and this probably says more about my personality than anything. I really like books that kind of challenge the status quo. And I mean, like, actually challenge the status quo. Like, I don't like the modern style of challenging the status quo where actually they're just like, agents of like the dominant ideology, write these things and like, ooh, wow, edgy, challenging the status quo. But like, they're universally adopted and printed in every newspaper and everyone says how wonderful they are and they win prizes. And like that's not edgy, right? It's not edgy if everyone in the whole world loves it and you win awards. It's edgy if it really kind of ticks off your contemporaries. That's when you know you're kind of hitting the sweet spot for satire. And I think C.S. Lewis definitely does that here. Here's another quote, and this is a decent one. He's talking about, I believe he's talking about his colleagues, university professors, but this can apply to any learned, cultured person. So he says, this is Screwtape again. He says, only the learned read old books, and we have now so dealt with the learned that they are all men the least likely to acquire wisdom by reading books. We have done this by inculcating the, quote, historical point of view. The historical point of view, put briefly, means that when a learned man is presented with any statement in an ancient author, the one question he never asks is whether it is true. He asks who influenced the ancient writer and how far the statement is consistent with what he said in other books and what phase in the writer's development or in the general history of thought it illustrates and how it affected later writers and how often it has been misunderstood, especially by the learned man's own colleagues, and what the general course of criticism on it has been for the last 10 years and what is the present state of the question. To regard the ancient writer as a possible source of knowledge to anticipate that what he said could possibly modify your thoughts or your behavior, this would be rejected as unutterably simple-minded. And since we cannot deceive the whole human race all the time, it is most important thus to cut every generation off from all others. From where learning makes a free commerce between the ages, there is always the danger that the characteristic errors of one may be corrected by the characteristic truths of another. But thanks be to our Father, he's talking about the devil here, and the historical point of view. Great scholars are now as little nourished by the past as the most ignorant person who holds that, quote, history is bunk. And I thought that was so profound, because we are doing that about as fast as you can do it right now. And I blame, and you know, I don't want to get myself into too much trouble here, but I really do blame the publish or perish environment in universities. I think that is just the dumbest possible model, especially for disciplines like history, because history is there to be studied and learned from. It's not there for you to like go back and change and revise and remold and print out in a different, you know, here's my hot take on, you know, this thing that someone said hundreds of years ago. That's not what it's there for. It's there for us to take the best distilled thought from humans who came before and learn from that, right? So these professors that are trying to keep their tenured positions, they're trying to keep their jobs, they're having to publish, and they can't make new history, so they just go and make up stuff about the old history, right? They start to look at the context of the author and start to look at, you know, maybe potential contradictions between what he said and what he thought, or what he said and the way he lived. And instead of just taking this distilled knowledge at face value and saying, wow, that is true and important, and we should definitely incorporate that into the way that we handle things in this crazy mixed up world of ours. Instead of doing that, they're just busy trying to make a name for themselves off of the backs of better, more intelligent people. And that is a personal pet peeve of mine. I really, really dislike the publish or perish environment. It encourages, and you know, I also kind of dislike the other reason I kind of dislike it is that you'll sit down, you could find, you know, in any freshman philosophy class or sociology class or psychology class or whatever, any freshman intro level class, you'll find some professor who got his PhD somewhere, who's just really high on himself and trying to make a name for himself. You'll find him preaching to just a choir of know-nothing children. Let's be honest, right? Like people who go to college, the freshmen who go to college, they know basically nothing. They have basically no life experience, no real world, like no skin in the game or anything. And they'll sit there and you'll sit in a philosophy class, and like these boneheads will sit there and tear apart Plato and Aristotle and you know, Marcus Aurelius, like they know anything, like they've accomplished anything, right? And so they'll sit there and, you know, boneheads leading boneheads to pick apart some of the greatest thinkers whose ideas have lasted for literally thousands of years, a lot of them. And you know, we're going to solve it here in this class. We teenagers and, you know, Mr. Fancy Pants professor in his loafers. It irks me a little bit. I'm not going to lie to you guys. And if you haven't caught on now, I'm not really a super big fan of formal education. So this C.S. Lewis book was right up my alley. I mean, for someone who's not a fan of formal education, I sure have done a lot of it. That's a contradiction that I'm still working out within my soul. But I read, and I read a lot, and I try to learn something from everything I read. And I try to give these authors the benefit of the doubt. I don't care what influenced them. Honestly, I don't. You know, whatever they're saying, if it's true, and if it sounds like truth, and if it smells like truth, and if it applies well into the real world, I mean, I'll take it. I'll have it. So, you know, we're kind of in a culture here, and C.S. Lewis, I think, nailed it, where, you know, instead of trying to discover truth and then push that truth forward, what we instead devote our time to, as especially intellectuals, we instead devote our time to just like picking around the edges of these great works to try and find something that we can, you know, put our little stamp on and say, look, there it is. I published a paper on this, and now I get to keep my job. And I'm so important and fancy, and everyone thinks I'm super smart because I'm associated now with this actual legend. And look, I even brought him down a peg, right? And now he's not as famous as he was, and everyone thinks he was lame because of the little things that I said. And now I'm smarter and better than Plato, right? Like, or whatever. Like, it just meh. And so reading C.S. Lewis's eloquent, like blasting of these people, it was really, I enjoyed it to say the least. And so here's another one, right? He talks about the education system and how there's kind of this celebration of mediocrity, and you don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. So rather than like pursue like sincere excellence, a lot of times what we end up doing is focusing on the lowest common denominator. And nobody should be left behind, and everyone deserves to have an education. That's not what I'm saying, not at all. Actually, I believe that everyone should have the right and have the opportunity to be educated and to learn and to become functional and all that. I absolutely believe that. And as long as it takes, right, we should work with everybody until they're there. Some people learn slower than others. That's totally fine. That doesn't mean anyone should be left behind. But I think a lot of times, you hear about like a grade dilution, right? Where, everybody gets an A in college and everyone, graduates summa cum laude or whatever, right? Like it's one of those things where you want to, I guess, question whether or not you're actually promoting excellence, and catering to the lowest common denominator is not ever going to be the way that we drive the best, most talented people to do their very best. Right. So, what C.S. Lewis says here is he's talking about education. And so he says, in a word, we may reasonably hope for the virtual abolition of education when I'm as good as you has fully had its way. All incentives to learn and all penalties for not learning will vanish. The few who might want to learn will be prevented. Who are they to overtop their fellows, after all? And anyway, the teachers, or should I say nurses, will be far too busy reassuring the dunces and patting them on the back to waste any time on real teaching. We shall no longer have to plan and toil to spread imperturbable conceit and incurable ignorance among men. The little vermin themselves will do it for us. And that's just something that's kind of, we should be conscientious of, right? Even if you don't believe that it's the devil who's behind, this whole like, lowest common denominator thing. I certainly don't think that it is. I mean, I hope not, but like, it's one of those things where like, we really should be trying to find ways for excellent people to do excellent things, right? All of humanity is blessed when excellent people, when the geniuses, when the Albert Einsteins, and when like these prominent minds can really, really stretch their legs and go for a run, and they'll pull the rest of us along with them, right? That's what we want. We want places for them to be able to do that. And there really aren't those places anymore, right? Because all of the universities that used to be, for the purpose of nurturing these brilliant minds, now they're just cash cows where you go to pay for a credential, and, nobody wants to pay to get bad grades. And so slowly and surely the incentives become misaligned and they change. And all of a sudden, I paid good money for this. I expect my piece of paper, and it becomes less about the learning and less about the developing and less about the, helping these geniuses to get up on their feet and run, and more just about, performing a basic service where you're selling a product, and that product is a degree, so that someone can go off and get some job doing something, and that has its purpose too. Certainly training people to do things is nice, but we got to make sure that we're finding room where the seeds of genius can really take root and help. I mean, that helps all of us, right? The person who cures cancer, it might be out there somewhere, sitting in an intro to philosophy class, just languishing while his professor waxes loquacious about Plato's shortcomings or whatever, right? Like we really should be finding places to cultivate genius. That's what I think, anyways. And then C.S. Lewis also talks about fashionable culture things, right? Like, so he says, this is Screwtape again. The use of fashions in thought is to distract men from their real dangers. We direct the fashionable outcry of each generation against those vices of which it is in the least danger, and fix its approval on the virtue that is nearest the vice which we are trying to make endemic. The game is to have them all running around with fire extinguishers whenever there's a flood, and all crowding to that side of the boat which is already nearly gone under. And this is so true. I mean, we are living in an era where so many people are working so hard to be tolerant
And, that's nobody wants to be intolerant. Well, I mean, I don't want to say nobody, right? Obviously, we still have some serious issues to do and some serious ground to cover. But like the average person really, really does not want to be labeled as any kind of intolerant, right? But that's the drum that we are beating every day as loudly as possible right now. Even though a lot of people are like, no, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be an ism or an ist, right? Like I want to be a good guy. I want to be kind. I want to practice that whole, share and tolerate and love thing that I learned in kindergarten or in Sunday school, as the case may be, right? Like I don't want to be a bad guy. But all that anyone can talk about now is, people failing to be as perfect as that particular thing as they might be, when we are losing a lot of ground in a lot of other areas, right? That we are just not paying attention to. So I think that's wise as well. And I don't know what he meant in his own time, but I can certainly see how it applies to our time. You may disagree. That's fine. In fact, as we're going forward, I expect you, dear listener, to disagree with me often, because I assume if you're interested in learning about the wisdom that's contained in these books that I'm reading, or you like books and you like to read deeply, I'm going to assume that you think for yourself and that you're not going to just let me kind of spoon feed anything to you. So please feel free to disagree with me violently if need be, right? I mean, don't come beat me up or anything. But like, if you hate what I'm saying right now, I would rather you feel strongly than not feel at all, right? And if you love what I'm saying, yeah, I would rather you feel strongly than just be bored, right? Think about this stuff, and that's why I would encourage you, go get the Screwtape Letters, pick it up. I don't care what your religious persuasion is. You can benefit from this book. There is wisdom in it. Absolutely. No question. And even if the wisdom even with what he says is just absolutely getting under your skin, at least it will challenge some of your thinking, right? If you're an honest person. Otherwise, you might just like snort and roll your eyes and be, what did C.S. Lewis, world-renowned author, know that I don't know? Whoever you are, you're not C.S. Lewis, I can tell you that. So, have a little humility, have a little integrity, and pick up the book, learn something from it. And if you hate it, then good, right? Let it challenge you, let it change you, let it grow you. I love reading books that I disagree with, right? I'm going to talk about a book that I read recently, maybe in a future episode, a couple ones down, perhaps. But a book that I read that I just hated. I could not stand this book. The entire time I was reading, I'm like, dude, this guy is so smug and he's so self-assured and so self-righteous. And like, it read like a puff piece that was written like by an idiot, that was designed to be written for idiots. And as I was getting through that, I felt myself becoming more like increasingly arrogant and sure of myself. And I was like, oh, okay. Yep. I'm straying a little too far into, I'm digging my heels in too much into my preconceptions. I better take a second to reevaluate this. So I did. I reevaluated. I still found that he was a moron. So I didn't reevaluate successfully, but we'll cover that at a different time. But this is something that I really, really loved about this book. And I think you would really love it too. So get the book. Let's go to the corners now. We're running a little long on the things I loved, but I wanted to get these quotes in because I think they're just super, super cool. So the rest of the podcast is going to go really quick. The rest of this episode is going to go really quick. Let's head over to the science corner first. Ready, go. All right. So welcome to the science corner. Today I'm talking about space Nazis. That's right. In the spirit of talking about the Blitz in World War II, that kind of towards the end of the war, the Germans started employing what was called V2 rockets, where they were just shooting rockets from mainland Europe over the English Channel and just like indiscriminately bombing British cities. And these were a terror, right? Because there was basically no warning. There was death from above, a sudden explosion, and boom, your family could be gone. And this was a source of deep distress and pain and suffering and terror for the British people. They hated the guys behind this rocket project, this V2 rocket project. And so when the war ends, they're like, okay, let's get our hands on these guys, these rocketeers. Where are they? Well, turns out they had all been secretly snuck away to America as part of something called Operation Paperclip, specifically Werner von Braun, the space Nazi himself, was taken. He designed the V2 rocket and delivered this death to the British people, and America just kind of took him and a bunch of his buds, his murderous Nazi buds, over to help develop the United States space program. And he did. He was instrumental in building this space program. He built the rockets that launched, America's first space satellites. He was part of the Apollo project to the moon. He built the Saturn V super heavy lift rocket that literally sent the first men to the moon. That was built by a Nazi scientist who murdered innocent people. So, it just goes to show that that even a Nazi murderer can be secretly smuggled away for the benefit of other people and never brought to justice, and can build an American. Actually, I don't know how this metaphor has or ever will apply to anyone ever again. I just think it's really interesting. And as someone who was born in London and has British family and has British citizenship, I happen to disagree strongly with the decision to bring Werner von Nazi Pants out of Germany before he could face justice and bring him to a cush life in America, where he gets to become a prominent aerospace engineer and architect of the launch vehicles that takes us to the moon. I mean, surely we could have found a better dude for that job. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that it wasn't cool that we went to the moon. I'm just saying maybe we shouldn't have had a Nazi do that for us, Nazi murderer. But, beggars can't be choosers, I guess. So that's it for the Science Corner. Let's go over to the History Corner. All right, so welcome to the History Corner. We are still in Blitz mode. We're still in English World War II mode. And I mentioned earlier, and this is history, but it's also psychology, right? So I read a book fairly recently by Malcolm Gladwell, who you probably have heard of. It's an awesome book. Get it, read it. But basically, he talks about this idea, like why did the Blitz not break the spirit of these Londoners who were under constant threat from bombing and rockets and everything like that? Why wasn't Germany able to affect their plan of breaking their spirits? Well, his theory, and I think it's a good one, is that, a direct hit from one of these things kills you. So you're not around to bum everyone out, with your pessimism. A near miss can leave you traumatized, especially if it kills some family members, right? But there were a lot of people in London. And so no matter how many bombs or rockets were dropped, they couldn't get enough coverage to affect near misses on enough people. So what ended up happening is there were a lot of remote misses, which led people to have this kind of sense of invulnerability, this sense that, like, yes, the bombs are falling, the rockets are flying, but, I'm still standing, can't knock me down. And over time, the more bombings there were, the more rocket attacks there were, and the more times you didn't get hit, the more sure you became that you weren't going to get hit. This kind of crazy psychological twist. So effectively, instead of decreasing morale like they thought they would, they effectively boosted the morale of the majority of the population, because they were like, yeah, I mean, I'm invincible. They've come and tried to attack me, X number of times, and I'm still standing, I'm still fighting, do your worst, Adolf, or whatever. Right. And you can't catch me. I am an invincible, plucky British person. And that really worked for them. And so that's a cool piece of history that I think, I don't know. I think recent events in the Middle East would teach us that we are not good at using high-level violence to dissuade entire populations from their preferred agenda. So maybe that's something that we should have learned from the Nazis. But who knows, live and learn, or live and don't learn, whatever. Okay, out of the History Corner, off to the Random Corner. Okay, so welcome to the Random Corner. We are talking about British stuff. We are talking about British stuff in World War II, and there's nothing more random than this piece of knowledge. And if you know the British, you know that they love them. They love them some tea, right? Stiff upper lip and all that, Cheerio, what. But they love them some tea, and if they don't get their tea, oh man, yeah, they will lose their fighting spirit quick. So, at the outbreak of World War II, the British government bought up all of the tea in the world, all the tea in the world, the whole world's supply of tea. They bought it. They bought it and they brought it to Britain and they held on to it and they moved it out of London and they hid it in secret underground bunkers because, man, they knew that if the tea stopped flowing, then the British people would lose their will to fight and give up. And the Germans, they knew that about the British reliance on tea as well. So they started trying to bomb places where they thought it was. They really started to go after it. So I just thought that was super random, super cool. This has been the Random Corner. Let's get back to the main review. All right, so here's the part where I talk about the things I didn't like. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, nothing. There's nothing that I didn't like. It made me think the whole time. I thought it was witty. I thought it was funny. I thought it was, here's the thing. If you're going to be intellectually honest when you read books that were written in the 40s, you're going to have to put up with some 1940s misogyny, right? That's just in there. A little sexism, perhaps a little racism and prejudice here and there. C.S. Lewis was a man in his time in the 40s, and I'm not a big believer in burning down the statues or whatever. As I said before, as you know by now, I'm a believer in learning from the good of the past and abandoning the bad of the past and moving on into better, brighter futures. I'm not the type of guy who's gonna throw away a perfectly brilliant man because he had some backwards ideas that he inherited from his culture, 100 years ago when he was a kid, right? Like, that's not me. That's not what I'm doing. So yes, that is, if you're sensitive to that, you're not going to like that. That is sprinkled about here and there. If you're sensitive to Christian apologetics, or if you're just not interested in Christianity, you might not like that as much. I thought it was great though. I thought the whole thing was excellently written, excellently delivered, witty, satirical, funny. Just made me think so much about how, all these pitfalls that I fall into personally. So without further ado, it is time for me to give this book my patented one-of-a-kind, ultra, super special, uber duber, scuba dee-doo rating system of the bells. Here we go. That's right. This is straight up a 5-star book, and it's because C.S. Lewis is a 5-star author, and this was a 5-star idea for a book. I mean, really cool premise, cool execution. I just loved it. You know that I loved it. And I'm kind of running low on time right now, so I'm going to skip to the parting thought, but you should definitely pick up this book. Oh, and before I forget, I on the advice of a couple of listeners, I went out and I became an Amazon affiliate. I have those links now. I'm posting them on my Facebook page. I'll also probably try and post them in the description of this podcast, wherever you get it. If you haven't already, come check out my Facebook page. It's just What's Tom Reading. It's a Facebook page. It's got my little books there, my little book logo. And the episodes they'll drop there. They'll also drop to your favorite podcasting platform: Stitcher, Spotify, Google, iTunes, all that stuff. It's on there. But if you love this book, come find my link and then click the link and it'll take you to the landing page on Amazon where the link is at. If you buy that book, it doesn't cost you anything extra, and Amazon has to give me a few pennies. And those pennies, it's not much, but eventually I'm hoping that it will add up to where I'll be able to buy another book, and that will help to feed my lust for books. So anything you guys want to do to support the podcast is greatly appreciated. I've really enjoyed getting feedback from you guys. I've really appreciated your kind words. Let's move on to the parting thought here, and I'll send you on your way. Okay. So for this parting thought, I wanted to stick with C.S. Lewis and his wisdom. So I'm just going to tell you, I'm just going to quote this. I'm just going to read this to you and we'll go from there. So he's talking about the concept of nothing and this kind of existentialism, this kind of abyss that I think anyone who has lived for enough time and has had enough experience, they know something about, right? So I'm just going to jump right in. He says, and nothing is very strong enough to steal away a man's best years, not in sweet sins, but in a dreary flickering of the mind over it knows not what and knows not why, in the gratification of curiosities so feeble that the man is only half aware of them, in drumming of fingers and kicking of heels, in whistling tunes that he does not like, or in the long, dim labyrinth of reveries that have not even lust or ambition to give them a relish, but which once chance association has started them, the creature is too weak and fuddled to shake off. As the uneasiness and reluctance to face it cut him off more and more from all real happiness, and as habit renders the pleasures, the vanity and excitement and flippancy at once less pleasant and harder to forgo, you will find that anything or nothing is sufficient to attract his wandering attention. You no longer need a good book, which he really likes, to keep him from his prayers or his work or his sleep. A column of advertisements in yesterday's paper will do. You can make him waste his time not only in conversation he enjoys with people whom he likes, but also in conversations with those he cares nothing about on subjects that bore him. You can make him do nothing at all for long periods. You can keep him up late at night, not roistering, but staring at a dead fire in a cold room. All the healthy and outgoing activities which we want him to avoid can be inhibited and nothing given in return, so that at last he may say, I now see that I spent most of my life in doing neither what I ought nor what I liked. And that, my friends, is, I think, the best depiction of existentialism and depression that I've ever heard in literature. I don't know about you, but the long nights staring at the dead fire in the cold room, that resonates. Maybe instead of a dead fire, I'm staring at YouTube videos on nothing, watching some guy play a video game, not even having the enthusiasm to play the game myself, but just to sit and watch somebody else play it. That type of time wasting. I know if you're anything like me, you've been a part of that, and it eats away at your soul, right? So just get out there and be engaged, shake off, if you can. I know that life is hard and it's not always as easy as just saying, shake it off, but whatever you can do to get yourself back up and running again, to get yourself, doing the things that you love, right? Don't get into that position where you say, now I see I spent most of my life in doing neither what I ought nor what I liked, right? Do what you ought, do what you like. Whatever your values are, go out and pursue them. Whatever you like, go out and enjoy it. Don't spend your time on stuff that is boring to you. Don't spend your time. Don't waste the life that you have on something that's just not worth it to you. So whatever you're doing right now that's a waste of your time, hopefully this podcast isn't on the list of things that's a waste of your time. Hopefully this has been enriching and useful to you. But get out there and get after it. Read deeply, enjoy the good books, enjoy fine things, enjoy fine people, and I really appreciate you guys. Thank you for listening. Have a great day. Goodbye.